See infrastructure, building a better world.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to tonight's program. And now on to the headlines.
Thailand's premier revoked an emergency decree that had been intended to quell pro-democracy rallies.
FBI intelligence officials warn of attempts by Iran and Russia to interfere in the U.S. elections.
At least 23 South Koreans have died after receiving flu shots in recent days.
And long jumper Sayaka Murakami is hoping not just for a medal at the postponed Tokyo Paralympics, but also for lasting acceptance in a Japanese society where disabled people can feel pressured to stay out of the public eye.
Thailand's premier revoked an emergency decree that had been intended to quell pro-democracy rallies. The former military chief had indicated late Wednesday he was preparing to lift the state of severe emergency as part of a move to diffuse tensions. The premier said in a televised address that the country must step back from the edge of the slippery slope that can easily slide to chaos. Let's listen in.
ผมต้องปกป้องประเทศจากพลังมืดที่ไม่ว่าจะมาจากที่ใดก็ตามไม่ให้สร้างความเสียหายให้กับประเทศไทยของเราผมต้องทำให้แน่ใจว่าประเทศไทยยังคงมีความยุติธรรมในสังคมเราได้เห็นการกระทำที่น่าหดหู่ใจอย่างมากที่เกิดขึ้นกับเจ้าที่ตำรวจมีการทุบตีทำร้ายตำรวจด้วยครีมเหล็กขนาดใหญ่และมีพฤติกรรมรุนแรงไม่เหมาะสมอีกหลายอย่างต่อเจ้าหน้าที่นะครับซึ่งเป็นการตั้งใจทำร้ายคนไทยด้วยกันแต่เวลาเดียวกันเราก็เห็นว่ายังมีคนอีกมากมายที่แม้ว่าจะกำลังทำผิดกฎหมายแต่ก็ปฏิบัติตนด้วยความสงบมีเจตนาที่ดีที่ต้องการขอความยุติธรรมให้เกิดขึ้นในสังคมและมีความจริงใจที่อยากจะเห็นประเทศดีขึ้นผมกำลังเตรียมที่จะยกเลิกพรก.สถานการณ์ฉุกเฉินที่มีความร้ายแรงในเขตท้องที่กรุงเทพเร็วๆนี้ยกเว้นหากมีสถานการณ์รุนแรงใดๆเกิดขึ้น
Over the past 3 months, demonstrations have taken place across Thailand, led by young people who have challenged the country's establishment, including the powerful monarchy, an institution long shielded from public criticism. Last week, the authorities tried to halt protests by introducing an emergency decree in the capital that bans gatherings of more than 4 people and the publication of news or online information that could create fear or affect national security. Dozens of people, including protest leaders, have been arrested. The measures, however, sparked even larger rallies and prompted protesters to employ cat-and-mouse tactics to outmaneuver the police.
Earlier, pro-democracy protesters and police clash in Bangkok as anti-government rallies calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha intensify. Take a look. Angry democracy activists marched on to the government house, defying an emergency decree imposed last week banning gatherings of more than 4 people. Democracy activists had massed at Bangkok's Victory Monument, while counter-rallies attracted thousands of royalists in the southern province of Narathiwat and scores more in the capital. Some minor scuffles broke out between rival factions before thousands of pro-democracy activists set off towards the seat of the executive. The Prime Minister is accused of rigging the 2019 elections in his favor. Protesters are also demanding the powerful and ultra-wealthy monarchy to stay out of politics, a previously taboo subject.
In other news, the Director of National Intelligence raised new concerns about election security. John Ratcliffe announced that intelligence had discovered that Iran is sending intimidating emails to American voters using their registration data. Take a look.
We would like to alert the public that we have identified that 2 foreign actors, Iran and Russia, have taken specific actions to influence public opinion relating to our elections. First, we have confirmed that some voter registration information has been obtained by Iran and separately by Russia. We ask every American to do their part to defend against those who wish us harm. The way you do that is quite simple. Do not allow these efforts to have their intended effect. If you receive an intimidating or manipulative email in your inbox, don't be alarmed and do not spread it.
We are not going to tolerate foreign interference in our elections or any criminal activity that threatens the sanctity of your vote or undermines public confidence in the outcome of the election. We've been working for years as a community to build resilience in our election infrastructure, and today, that infrastructure remains resilient. You should be confident that your vote counts. Early, unverified claims to the contrary should be viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Voters in 4 battleground states have received threatening emails purporting to be from the far-right group of Proud Boys. Ratcliffe also said Russia is trying to interfere using voter data it obtained.
Iran's foreign ministry said it summoned the Swiss ambassador on Thursday over baseless U.S. allegations that Tehran has taken actions to influence public opinion ahead of the U.S. presidential election. U.S. authorities, he said, have put forward a baseless claim on the verge of the country's election so that they would advance their undemocratic and predefined scenario through shifting the blame. He called the accusations fabricated and clumsy and restated Iran's position that it favors no specific candidate in the 2020 election.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin also dismissed as absolutely groundless claims that Moscow had obtained U.S. voter information and taken actions to influence public opinion ahead of the November 3 election. Accusations are raining down every day. All of them are absolutely groundless. They are not based on anything. That is according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He told this to reporters after the allegations made by the U.S. Director of National Intelligence.
Still in the U.S. President Donald Trump tells reporters as he departs for a rally in North Carolina that the decision to mute candidates' microphones during the debate when they are not answering questions is very unfair, adding that NBC News journalist and debate moderator Kristen Welker is a very biased person. Let's watch this.
Well, I think the mute is very unfair. And I think it's very bad that they're not talking about foreign affairs. They're supposed to be talking about foreign affairs. And I think that the anchor is a very biased person. Her parents are very biased. But that's my life. In the meantime, that's the White House standing behind me, right?
I'm not going to answer the question.
Why would you answer that
because
question?
The question is, the question is,
Justice, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
Who's on your list?
Right. Gentlemen, I think
this is so unprecedented.
He's going to pack the court.
We have
not going to give a list.
President Donald Trump squares off against Democratic challenger Joe Biden on Thursday, U.S. time, in what promises to be a bruising final debate with less than 2 weeks left in their turbulent fight for the White House. The pair's last televised showdown spiraled into an ugly confrontation marred by interruptions and name-calling, prompting organizers to introduce mic muting this time to try to keep things civil.
Meanwhile, former U.S. President Barack Obama excoriated Donald Trump and warned against complacency despite favorable opinion polls during his first public rally in support of Democratic challenger Joe Biden ahead of the November 3 election. At the drive-in rally in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, one of a handful of battleground states expected to decide the election, Obama lashed out at Trump's behavior and declared him incapable of taking the job seriously.
Democracy is not going to work if the people who are supposed to be our leaders lie every day and just make things up. We can't be complacent. I don't care about the polls. There were a whole bunch of polls last time. Didn't work out because a whole bunch of folks stayed at home and got lazy and complacent. Not this time, not in this election. So Joe's not going to screw up testing. He's not going to call scientists idiots. He's not going to host a super spreader event at the White House. Joe will get this pandemic under control with a plan to make testing free and widely available, to get a vaccine to every American cost-free, and to make sure our frontline heroes never ask other countries for the equipment they need. I get that this president wants full credit for the economy he inherited and zero blame for the pandemic that he ignored. But you know what? The job doesn't work that way. Tweeting at the television doesn't fix things. Making stuff up doesn't make people's lives better. A secret Chinese bank account. Listen, can you imagine if I had a secret Chinese bank account when I was running for re-election? You think Fox News might have been a little concerned about that? They would have called me Beijing Barry.
The U.S. government said it had approved the sale of $1 billion worth of advanced air-to-ground missiles to Taiwan as the island tries to shore up its defenses against China. The State Department said it had agreed to sell 135 of the precision-guided air-launched AGM-84H Slammer cruise missiles. Also approved was the sale of 6 MS-110 air reconnaissance pods and 11 M142 mobile light rocket launchers, taking the value of the 3 arms packages to $1.8 billion. The Slammer missiles will help Taiwan meet current and future threats as it provides all-weather, day and night precision attack capabilities against both moving and stationary targets on the ground or ocean surface, a statement said. Democratic and self-ruled Taiwan lives under constant threat of invasion by authoritarian China, whose leaders view the island as part of their territory. They have vowed to one day seize the island by force if necessary.
Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry said that U.S. arms sales to Taiwan severely damaged China's sovereignty and security interests. Take a look.
我们敦促美方充分认清美售台武器问题的严重危害性，恪守一个中国原则和中美3个联合公报规定，停止售台武器和美台军事联系，撤销有关对台军售计划，以免对中美关系和台海和平稳定造成进一步损害。中方将根据形势发展，作出正当、必要反应。
Washington has been eager to see Taiwan bolster its defense capabilities in the face of increasingly assertive moves from Beijing, which has been ratcheting up pressure on the island ever since President Tsai Ing-wen was first elected in 2016. Taiwan's President Tsai said earlier this month that Taiwan would continue to modernize its defense capabilities and enhance its capacity for asymmetric warfare to deal with military expansion and provocation from the other side of the Taiwan Strait.
And in Nigeria, chaos gripped Lagos after soldiers fired into a crowd overnight. It's unclear how many were killed, but the incident fueled a brewing crisis in Africa's most populous nation. Please watch this.
We are here as Nigerians to say no to bad governance. Yes. Our country is in disarray. There is a video that went viral yesterday. We say everyone should go and watch it. Nigerians being killed. They turned off the lights just because they wanted to kill Nigerian youth that are protesting. They said that our youth are lazy. But look at us. We went out of Nigeria because they said they want. What will make me happy if the sun is ended, if SWAT is ended, if they stop killing Nigerian youth, if they stop wasting the livelihood of Nigerian citizens, and if Buhari must go, and if they compensate those that have lost their life.
Nobody is holding a stick, neither a gun, nothing. All what we are holding is a flag. Apart from the flag, nothing much, nothing. So all what we are saying is peace, 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 peace. But the soldiers refuse. Before you know it, they off the camera. After offing the camera, the next thing they off the light and begins shooting spreadingly.
The Lagos governor at first insisted no fatalities had been recorded, but later said the authorities were investigating the death of one person resulting from blunt force trauma to the head. He said at least 25 people were wounded. The Nigerian soldiers said no army were even there, but eyewitnesses claimed the opposite.
In London, meanwhile, yesterday afternoon, hundreds from the Nigerian community came out in support of meaningful reform.
Enough is enough. All we're asking for is to be treated like human beings. That's all we're asking. Treat us like human beings. Give us good roads. Give us light, electricity. That's all we're asking for. For them to shoot unarmed protesters, that is criminal, and people died. Oh my God, these are young people. It was really heartbreaking. I'm not in Nigeria, but I have family and friends back home. I couldn't sleep, and I wasn't even there. I have cried my eyes out for the past 18 hours or so.
We are not afraid of them. We are here. We are not afraid. We are going to speak out. It's high time for them to go.
This is the beginning. I have no idea. But we can't stop now. We can't. We are mothers standing behind our children who are fighting for their basic human rights.
British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab earlier said he was deeply concerned by recent clashes in Nigeria and reports of civilian deaths and called for an end to violence. The African Union Commission chairman on Thursday also strongly condemned the deadly violence in Lagos and called on all parties to privilege dialogue. The shooting also drew international condemnation, with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet saying reports suggested it could have even been premeditated. At least 56 people have died across the country since the protests began on October 8, with about 38 killed nationwide on Tuesday alone. That is according to Amnesty International.
In other news, Spain becomes the first European Union nation to surpass 1 million coronavirus infections as the Madrid government mulls fresh restrictions to curb the spread of the disease. The country has recorded 16,973 cases of COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says taking the total to 1,005,295 since its first case was diagnosed on January 31st in the Canary Islands. Spain, which is home to around 47 million people, is only the 6th country in the world to cross this grim milestone after the United States, India, Brazil, Russia and Argentina, according to an AFP tally based on official figures. The new wave of contagion has been less deadly than in late March and April and the height of health crisis when fatalities routinely exceeded 800 per day, as the median age of new infections has dropped. But with healthcare workers warning the spike could once again overwhelm hospitals, Health Minister Salvador Illa said Tuesday the government is considering several new measures, including nighttime curfews, such as those recently put in place in France and Belgium.
In other coronavirus news, at least 23 South Koreans have died after receiving flu shots in recent days. Now, this has raised concerns about vaccine safety, even as authorities rolled out a link. South Korea's health authorities reaffirmed on Thursday that the state-initiated seasonal flu shot program will still continue. Yonhap News Agency said the country has been pushing for a state-free flu shot scheme to inoculate some 19 million people, including teenagers and senior citizens, to curb the possible twin-demic. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, or KDCA, said there were more reported cases of death, yet it is the experts' opinion that there is no direct link between the deaths and the vaccination. The deaths, including a 17-year-old boy and a man in his 70s, took place just a week after the resumption of the vaccination program for teenagers and senior citizens on October 13. No toxic substances had been found in the vaccines, and at least 5 of the 6 people investigated had underlying conditions. The inoculation program was suspended for 3 weeks after it was discovered that some 5 million doses, which need to be refrigerated, had been exposed to room temperature while being transported to a medical facility. South Korea's vaccines come from a variety of sources.
Germany reported a huge jump in coronavirus cases on Thursday, with health experts warning of a very serious situational and regional disagreements hampering efforts to slow the spread. Let's watch this.
Es sind im Moment allerdings immer noch jüngere Menschen betroffen. Wir sehen weiterhin mehr leichte Erkrankungen als im Frühjahr. Der Grund ist das Alter der Betroffenen. Aber der Anteil der Menschen über 60 steigt auch wieder. Ausbrüche in Alten- und Pflegeheimen oder Krankenhäusern nehmen ebenfalls wieder zu und die Hospitalisierungen nehmen auch deshalb zu. Das heißt also, es werden wieder mehr Covid-Patienten im Krankenhaus behandelt. Es kommt im privaten Umfeld zu vielen Ansteckungen, weil wir dort sehr nah beieinander sind. Damit wir uns im Haushalt überhaupt anstecken können, muss das Virus allerdings erstmal in den Haushalt gelangen. Es muss ja irgendwie in den Haushalt reinkommen. Und hier gibt es eben oft einen Zusammenhang mit privaten Feiern, mit Zusammenkünften von Freunden und Familien. Die Menschen stecken sich eben dort an und tragen das Virus weiter in ihre Familien oder Wohngemeinschaften.
The country reported 11,287 new cases of COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, a large increase from the previous record of 7,830 last Friday. The figures are still well below those of many other European countries, but Germany has been facing a steady increase in cases for several weeks. At a meeting last week between Chancellor Angela Merkel and the heads of Germany's 16 states, new measures were agreed for so-called hotspots, including caps on the number of people gathering indoors and a ban on late-night alcohol sales. But under Germany's federal system, each state ultimately has the right to decide whether to impose the rules, leading to a patchwork of regulations.
And staying on coronavirus news, we have an update coming in. Joining us live from Switzerland is Man Glosser. Hello, Man.
Hi, Alma.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm good, thank you for asking. So what is the latest in Switzerland?
Yes, so lately, Switzerland has been concerned about the rapid rise in coronavirus cases in all age groups and across all cantons. An increasing number of persons admitted to hospital is also observed. Currently, Switzerland has 97,019 confirmed cases and 1,867 deaths. That's 5,256 cases and 11 deaths more in the past 24 hours. Therefore, the federal government and the cantons thought of establishing new national measures to better protect the public's health and to prevent the health system from getting overwhelmed in the near future. This is also the way to significantly curb the increasing number of new cases so that the cantons can keep on efficiently contact tracing. However, despite the restrictions, Switzerland hopes that her economy can still function and that people can live their lives as peacefully as possible. For this purpose, last October 18, the Federal Council held an extraordinary meeting in which they introduced further national measures to fight against the rapidly increasing coronavirus infection in the country. We know that the requirement for persons over the age of 12 to wear a mask on public transport has been in place since July 6. Nevertheless, it has been decided that from Monday, October 19, that measure will be extended to railways stations, including platforms, airports, and other publicly accessible public transport areas, such as bus and tram stops. People who are unable to wear a mask for medical reasons are still exempted from this requirement. But that's not all. Masks are as well compulsory to wear in publicly accessible indoor spaces, counting all shops, shopping centers, banks, post offices, museums, libraries, cinemas, theaters, concert venues, indoor areas of zoos and botanical gardens, restaurants, bars, discos, casinos, hotels with the exception of guest rooms, entrance areas and changing rooms in swimming pools, sports facilities and gyms, doctor surgeries, hospitals and places of worship, advisory centers and neighborhood centers. They also must be worn in publicly accessible areas of administrative buildings. Of course, the measure must also be applied in all schools and higher education establishments, in childcare facilities, in the training areas of sport and fitness centers, if part of the center's precautionary measures. Furthermore, increasing coronavirus infections are partly due to gatherings with families and friends. That is why it is strongly recommended that those gatherings should be avoided as much as possible. If private events are attended by over 15 people, food and drink may only be consumed while seated. Whenever someone stands up, he or she must wear a mask. Hygiene rules must be observed at all times, and contact details must be recorded anyway. When private events are attended by more than 100 people, the same set of precautionary measures as for public events must be applied, and they may only be held in publicly accessible venues. When it comes to spontaneous gatherings of more than 15 persons, they are not allowed in public spaces like in town squares, streets, paths, and parks. This is to prevent private events moving outdoors. However, organized outdoor events such as political and civil society demonstrations are allowed on condition that precautionary measures are observed. Another requirement is that food and drink may be consumed only while seated in restaurants, bars, and clubs, whether it be indoor or out. Meanwhile, the Federal Council went as well further on working from home in the Special Situation COVID-19 Ordinance. Employers must follow the recommendation by the Federal Office of Public Health for employees to work from home so that a large number of people will be prevented from coming together, especially during peak hours, and that close contact in the workplace is minimized. This will also avoid risky situations, such as a whole team having to go into quarantine if one member becomes infected with COVID-19. As the cantons have always been leading in battling against the COVID-19 pandemic in Switzerland since June 19, the Confederation expects them to continue in conducting widespread testing, contact tracing, and use targeted measures to help fight the epidemic. Back to you, Alma.
All right, Man, aside from all those measures that you said, are there any updates or more measures taken, like, for example, through vaccines?
Yes, actually, it is known that Swiss federal government wants to ensure Switzerland a rapid access to COVID-19 vaccines. And given the fact that we still don't clearly know which vaccines will ultimately prevail, the Confederation took a diversified approach and signed an agreement last October 16 with AstraZeneca, a UK pharmaceutical company, and the Swedish government for the delivery of up to 5.3 million doses of vaccine. Switzerland will then gain access to a further COVID-19 vaccine, and therefore this will help in fighting against this epidemic. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Man, for your updates there in Switzerland. Looking forward to more updates there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Alma. I'm Man Rauser, reporting from the Geneva, Switzerland Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
Eagle News, we'll be right back.
The South Luzon Expressway, a 36-kilometer long road that runs from Alabang to Santo Tomas, Batangas, connects several commercial and residential areas in the Greater Manila and the provinces of Laguna, Cavite, and Batangas. This will soon be extended all the way to the province of Quezon.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
The IMF is predicting the worst economic decline in Asia in generations due to COVID-19 and warning that rising inequality could lead to social unrest. In the newly released Asia Pacific Regional Economic Outlook, released on October 21 in Washington, D.C., he warned that if governments fail to take action, that tens of millions may be pushed into extreme poverty. Let's listen in.
The Asia Pacific region has been hit hard by the pandemic. You've seen our projections. With regional growth at minus 2.2%, 2020 will be remembered as the most severe contraction in generations. Inequality in Asia had been rising even before the crisis, and the pandemic is hitting those at the bottom even harder than the rest. The limited reach of social safety nets and large size of informal sectors is proving to be a roadblock to supporting the most vulnerable at this critical time. Robotization, which is already well advanced in Asia, may displace even more lower-skilled workers going forward. The resulting higher levels of inequality could even lead to social unrest, itself an obvious impediment to sustained economic growth. For 2021, our projection of 6.9% growth is slightly stronger than we had in June. But in combination with the deep recessions this year, it nevertheless implies that a number of economies will still be smaller at the end of 2021 than before the pandemic. Economic scarring seems a near certainty at this point. Our projections suggest that potential output by the middle of this decade could be some 5% lower than before the pandemic, due to the fall in labor force participation and weak confidence that dims private investment.
China has been a bright spot of growth, and Austria praised the government's quick and decisive measures put in place to stem the impact of the virus, followed by testing and contact tracing measures to prevent flare-ups. He also praised Vietnam and Japan for their efforts, but China's current growth may be temporarily robust, and it should use the current time to rebalance its economy, encourage more domestic consumption. Again, let's listen in.
There would be an effect. A lot of the exports of China, however, are very specifically related to medical equipment and home electronics, the things that are really being used by the world as a whole during the pandemic. And you know, the half-life of these exports is probably pretty short. The demand for lots of medical equipment and lots of home electronics will eventually peter out.
IAG, the owner of British Airways and Spanish carrier Iberia, dove into a loss totaling 1.3 billion euros or $1.52 billion in the third quarter on coronavirus fallout, it announced on Thursday. The operating loss before exceptional items compared with profit of 1.4 billion euros 1 year earlier, IAG said in statement ahead of a full earnings release due next week. Revenue slumped 83% to 1.2 billion euros in the reporting period, it added. IAG said it expects capacity in the current fourth quarter to be no more than 30% compared with a year earlier. IAG said bookings had not recovered as expected owing to additional measures implemented by many European governments in response to a second wave of COVID-19 infections. New British Airways Chief Executive Sean Doyle on Monday urged the UK government to end the quarantining of passengers arriving from abroad.
In other aviation news, unions supporting Hong Kong flag carrier Cathay Pacific staff say the airline's decision to cut its workforce by nearly a quarter is a political one. During a protest outside the company's owner Swire Group's office, the battered airline announced it will cut thousands of jobs in an effort to survive the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. But Union Chief Carol Ng describes the layoff as a continuation of the company's crackdown on pro-democracy staff last year at the height of the city's protest movement and a political move to accommodate an upcoming mainland China-backed airline into Hong Kong's aviation industry. Take a look.
If there is a necessary redundancy, they need to exhausting every single avenue of the cost-saving measures before they enter to any redundancy plan. But what's driven behind, we strongly believe, is a political wipeout of those disobedient staff and make way and paving the way for Greater Bay Area's airlines come to Hong Kong. The government definitely have a role inside, but they choose to be silent. And once anybody who agree this new contract, and they shall enter a kind of 12 months probational period. What that means, throughout the next year, you better be silent, you better keep your low profile, and don't make a mess in front of your employer. 5,300幾個嘅家庭，我唔識形容嗰一晚嘅心情。有好多都係我嘅朋友，亦都有我哋工會裏面曾經努力過嘅工會理事，佢哋乜嘢都冇做錯，但係就係呢一次被僱主徹底放棄、徹底出賣嘅情況之下，失去咗佢哋嘅工作。
Cathay Pacific announced plans on Wednesday to cut its workforce by nearly a quarter and close one of its short-haul airlines in an effort to survive the devastating impacts of the pandemic. Across the globe, airlines have been hammered as the pandemic has slashed international travel, and they face a long, hard winter after a much-hoped-for rebound failed to materialize. Cathay Pacific, Hong Kong's flag carrier, published a corporate restructuring plan that will lead to 8,500 job losses in total, April, nearly a quarter of its workforce and one of its airlines to disappear completely. Cathay Dragon, a subsidiary that primarily flies shorter haul flights within Asia, will cease operations. Cathay, much like regional rival Singapore Airlines, has no domestic market to fall back on.
Devastated by the pandemic, Spain's all-important tourism sector is expected to incur losses of more than 100 billion euros or $120 billion this year, an industry body warned on Wednesday. If the dire prediction proves correct, the Excel Tour Tourism Association said it would take the sector's annual income back to the level it was in 1995. Quoting the association's vice president, José Luis Zoreda, "We would go back 25 years in terms of what the Spanish tourism sector generates." He added it would be a dire scenario. Excel Tour has been forced to further amend its annual predictions after regional authorities stepped up restrictions to slow the virus. The virus has claimed 34,000 lives and infected nearly 1 million people, the highest figure in the EU. Since early October, the Spanish capital and close to a dozen nearby towns have been subjected to a partial lockdown, and across the northeastern region of Catalonia, bars and restaurants have been closed for a fortnight.
In other business news, pharmaceutical giant Purdue Pharma is pleading guilty to federal charges of conspiracy and paying kickback to doctors in the national opioid epidemic. It involves the painkiller OxyContin and is part of an $8 billion settlement. Now, some state and congressional Democrats have argued the settlement is not sufficient punishment. Purdue Pharma executives and owners would still face criminal liability. Take a look.
Good morning. The global settlement announced today involves the company pleading guilty to 3 felony counts for defrauding the United States and violating the anti-kickback statute from 2009 to 2017. In addition to the company having agreed to plead guilty to these 3 felony counts, the company has agreed to a $3.544 billion criminal fine and a $2 billion criminal forfeiture amount. Further, on top of those, to resolve its civil liability, Purdue Pharma has agreed to $2.8 billion in damages to the United States. If it's approved, this will be a corporate settlement in total of more than $8.3 billion. Additionally, members of the Sackler family have agreed to pay $225 million in a civil settlement that will provide civil releases only. The agreed resolution, if approved by the court, will require that the company be dissolved and no longer exist in its present form. It would require that the Sacklers must relinquish all ownership and control of the company or of any of its successors, and the company's assets would be transferred to a new public benefit company, or PBC, owned by a trust for the benefit of the American public. These are all examples of the department's unwavering commitment to turn the tide of the opioid crisis that's ravaged the country.
The unlawful dangerous scheme put profits over people by seeking to increase scripts for addictive EROs even when they were not medically appropriate and at the height of the U.S. opioid crisis. A time when in Vermont, where I'm from, and across the country, people were suffering under opioid addictions that sometimes ended in death, and so many of those addiction stories began with OxyContin.
Back to aviation news. American Airlines just announced that its earnings plunged 73% in the third quarter amid the collapse in air travel during the coronavirus pandemic, causing a loss of $2.4 billion. The company, which recently laid off 19,000 workers after Washington policymakers failed to renew funding to support airlines, said it reduced the rate at which it burns cash to $44 million a day in the July to September period, compared to $58 million daily average in the second quarter. Another 20,000 employees took early retirement or long-term leave as American, like other airlines, struggled to survive.
In other news, the United States tightened rules on 6 more Chinese media organizations, saying that they are propaganda outlets that answer to the state. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told the news conference that the affected outlets will face no restrictions on their reporting. Let's listen in.
Today, I'm announcing the State Department is designating the U.S. operations of 6 China-based media companies as foreign missions. They are all substantially owned or effectively controlled by a foreign government. We're not placing any restrictions on what these outlets can publish in the United States. We simply want to ensure that American people, consumers of information, can differentiate between news written by a free press and propaganda distributed by the Chinese Communist Party itself. They're not the same thing.
The fresh move against Chinese media was met with anger in Beijing, which said it would take necessary countermeasures without specifying which U.S. outlets it might target inside its territory. It was the 3rd round of U.S. designations of Chinese outlets as foreign missions, which requires them to report details on their U.S.-based staff and real estate transactions to the State Department. The 6 organizations newly designated as foreign missions are Yikai Global, Jifang Daily, Xinmin Evening News, Social Sciences in China Press, Beijing Review, and Economic Daily. The State Department earlier enforced rules on 9 better-known outlets, including the Xinhua News Agency and China Global Television Network. China has denounced the regulations and retaliated by expelling U.S. citizens who work for major news organizations, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal.
Now here in the Philippines, the garment industry has taken a big hit from the coronavirus pandemic, cutting exports by almost 40% and putting the livelihoods of over 600,000 Filipinos at risk, the International Labor Organization said. In the study titled Supply Chain Ripple Effect, How COVID-19 is Affecting Garment Workers and Factories in Asia and the Pacific, the ILO said total combined imports to the United States, the European Union, and Japan from 10 major apparel and footwear producing countries in Asia fell significantly between January and June 2020 when compared to the same period last year. It said the largest percentage decreases in exports were observed in China, India, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. The research highlights that major buying countries' imports from garment exporting countries in Asia dropped by up to 70% in the first half of this year due to collapsing consumer demand, government lockdown measures, and disruptions to raw materials imports necessary for garment production. Please don't go away. We will be back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Aquino here at Hatley Castle, one of the filming locations for the X-Men series. Don't forget to tune in to Digital Nest only on Net 25.
look to NHK World Japan for news of the coronavirus outbreak across the globe. You'll find updates and insights in the specialized section of our website. Catch up with programs on your schedule through the free video on-demand service. Learn how to stay in shape and maintain your health deliciously. Ready when you are. NHK World Japan.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced, eager news, because we live in interesting times.
Long jumper Sayaka Murakami is hoping not just for a medal at the postponed Tokyo Paralympics, but also for a lasting acceptance in a Japanese society where disabled people can feel pressure to stay out of the public eye. Take a look.
もちろんパラリンピックはアスリートの最高峰の場所なのでスポーツとしてご覧いただきたいっていう思いもあるんですけど、ただやはりそれをきっかけにこんな障害でもこういうことができるんだとか、そういうふうに思っていただいて、それで終わりではなくて、こういう人が一緒に暮らしてるっていうことを今一度もし考えるきっかけになっていただければなって思いますし。障害があろうがなかろうが自分の好きなことをやる権利って誰にでもあるのに、それが障害があるからこれができない、これをしちゃいけないっていう風な思いの人がいるっていうのはまだまだいるっていうのを聞いた中で、そうじゃないんだよっていうので、私も好きなことをやってこの誇らしい義足を見せてこんなに楽しくやってるんだよっていうのを少しでも多くの人に見てもらって、障害がポジティブなものになればいいなっていう風に思ってます。
An oil painting by British street artist Banksy parodying a Claude Monet masterpiece sold in London for £7.6 million, the second highest prize at auction for the mysterious artist. The oil on canvas work, Show Me the Monet, a modern take on Monet's impressionist classic, The Water Lily Pond, sold for exactly £7,551,600, or equivalent to $9.8 million. 8.4 million euros at Sotheby's following a bidding battle. Let's watch this.
We have arrived at Show Me the Monet, one of the most important paintings of Banksy's provocative career, held in the same collection for the past 15 years. Here the artist painstakingly repurposes an iconic image in the Western canon, that of Claude Monet's View, the Japanese footbridge in his wonderful and beloved garden at Giverny. Banksy delivering a complex dialogue that tackles prescient issues of our time. 100,000.
Show Me the Monet was created in 2005 as part of a collection called The Crude Oils and had first been shown publicly in only Banksy's second gallery exhibition. The painting transforms Monet's masterpiece depicting a Japanese-style bridge in his famous garden at Giverny into a modern-day fly tipping spot. Instead of an idyllic lily pond, the composition shows discarded shopping trolleys and a fluorescent orange traffic cone floating in the water beneath the bridge. Banksy, whose real name has never officially been confirmed, began his career spray painting buildings in Bristol, England, and has become one of the world's best-known artists.
$7.8 million, did you say?
Pounds.
Pounds, yes. Yeah.
Well, you know what's amazing? In this age of social media, no one knows who he is.
Yes, that's true.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
If I were him, I would say who I am. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program was brought to you by SMC Infrastructure, building a better world.